I stood in the kitchen of Romano's family restaurant, the same kitchen where I'd spent 10 years building this business from bankruptcy to success, listening to my parents announce that my younger brother Jake would be the new CEO. Not me. Not the woman who'd worked 18-hour days, who'd secured the $900,000 catering contract with Pinnacle Hotels that would change everything. Jake, who'd been absent for 5 years, pursuing his dreams in Los Angeles. I set down my chef's knife and walked out. 1 week later, they called me, panicked. 10 years ago, I was 22 and fresh out of culinary school when I came home to find my parents drowning in debt. Romano's, my grandfather's dream restaurant that had fed 3 generations of families in our neighborhood, was 3 months behind on rent and facing foreclosure. The health department had cited violations. Regular customers had stopped coming, and my father Frank sat at the corner table every night with his head in his hands, surrounded by unpaid bills. My mother Carol would pace the empty dining room, clutching rosary beads and whispering prayers in Italian, just like her mother-in-law had taught her. The restaurant that once buzzed with laughter and the clinking of wine glasses had become a tomb of broken dreams and mounting debt. The ancient espresso machine wheezed its last breath. The burgundy leather booths had tiers held together with duct tape, and the kitchen equipment belonged in a museum rather than a working restaurant. Jake was in Los Angeles then, sending postcards of palm trees and promises that his acting career was about to take off. His phone calls became shorter and less frequent, always ending with requests for money and stories about auditions that never seemed to materialize into actual roles. While he chased Hollywood fantasies, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work saving our family legacy. I started by modernizing the menu, combining my grandfather's traditional recipes with contemporary techniques I'd learned in culinary school. The old marinara sauce that had been the same for 40 years got a subtle upgrade with San Marzano tomatoes and fresh herbs. I introduced a weekend brunch menu that brought in young families who had never considered Romano's before. The wine list expanded beyond the dusty bottles that had sat on shelves since the 1980s. Building relationships with local suppliers took months of early morning trips to farmers markets and late-night negotiations with distributors. I convinced Giuseppe, the old Italian baker down the street, to supply our bread exclusively in exchange for promoting his bakery to our customers. Maria Gonzalez, who ran the organic herb farm outside town, became not just a vendor, but a partner who helped me create seasonal menus that showcased her produce. The hardest part was rebuilding trust with our staff. Many of the experienced servers and kitchen workers had left during the worst months, when paychecks bounced and hope seemed lost. I hired new people carefully, training them not just in service, but in the story of Romano's, helping them understand that they weren't just employees, but guardians of something precious. Tony Martinez became my sous chef, a quiet man in his 50s who had worked in hotel kitchens for decades, but had never been given the chance to contribute his ideas. Under my guidance, he developed signature dishes that combined his Mexican heritage with Italian traditions, creating fusion plates that kept customers curious and coming back. Sarah Kim joined as our front-of-house manager, bringing organizational skills and a warm personality that made even the most difficult customers feel welcome. By year 3, we had eliminated all debt. By year 5, Romano's was the most popular family restaurant in a 6-block radius. By year 8, food bloggers were writing reviews that compared our small neighborhood spot to downtown establishments, charging 3 times our prices. Last year, I started exploring catering opportunities, knowing that special events and corporate contracts could provide the steady revenue stream that would secure our future permanently. The Pinnacle Hotels contract represented everything I had worked toward. 3 luxury hotels in the city needed exclusive catering services for their corporate events, wedding receptions, and private parties. $900,000 over 2 years, with the possibility of expansion to their properties in other cities. The negotiations took 6 months, dozens of tastings, and detailed proposals that showcased not just our food, but our reliability, professionalism, and capacity to handle large-scale operations. I had personally cultivated relationships with the hotel management teams, spending evenings at industry networking events and weekends, attending wedding showcases where Pinnacle hotels promoted their venues. Rebecca Chen, the corporate events director, had become more than a business contact. She was someone who trusted my judgment and recommended Romano's to her colleagues at other hotel chains. When Jake returned home last month, tanned and carrying expensive luggage that suggested his 5-year absence had been more successful than his phone calls indicated, I felt genuinely happy to see him. He looked healthy and confident, talking about connections he had made in the entertainment industry and business ideas he wanted to explore. I assumed he was ready to contribute to the restaurant that had supported his Hollywood dreams through wire transfers and emergency loans. The betrayal came during what I thought was a family planning meeting. My parents had asked both Jake and me to join them in the small office above the restaurant on a Sunday morning when we were closed. I brought financial reports showing our growth, profit margins, and projections for the Pinnacle Hotels contract. Jake brought charm and stories about celebrity restaurants he had visited in Los Angeles. For 2 hours, we discussed expansion plans, staffing needs, and the logistics of handling large catering events while maintaining our regular service. I outlined the additional equipment we would need, the training programs for new staff, and the timeline for implementing systems that could handle the increased volume. Everything seemed collaborative and exciting, a family working together toward a shared future. Then my father cleared his throat and announced that Jake would be taking over as CEO, effective immediately. Not a gradual transition where I would train him, not a partnership where we would share responsibilities. Complete authority transferred to someone who had been absent during every challenge, every late night, every small victory that had rebuilt Romano's from the ground up. The justification was worse than the decision itself. I discovered through a phone conversation I accidentally overheard later that evening that Jake had spent his private meeting with our parents, convincing them that family businesses should be passed down through the male line. He argued that I would eventually get married and leave anyway, making any investment in my leadership a temporary solution. Our parents, immigrants, who still carried old-world beliefs about gender roles despite decades in America, agreed that tradition mattered more than competence. Sitting in that office, watching my parents' faces as they avoided my eyes, I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with love and respect. They were not just choosing Jake over me. They were choosing outdated beliefs over 10 years of proof that I was capable, dedicated, and successful. They were choosing tradition over the evidence of their own eyes. I set down my chef's knife on the desk between the financial reports and walked out of the restaurant without saying another word. Behind me, I heard Jake calling my name and my mother's voice pleading for understanding. But my feet kept moving toward the door in my car and away from the life I had built with my own hands. Sarah Peterson had been my best friend since culinary school, and her spare bedroom became my refuge during that first devastating week away from Romano's. She worked as a pastry chef at Meridian, one of the most successful restaurant groups in the city, and her small apartment near downtown had become a second home to me over the years during our Friday night wine and complaint sessions about the restaurant industry. While I sat on her couch, staring at job listings on my laptop and trying to process the magnitude of what had happened, Jake was implementing changes at Romano's that made my absence immediately apparent. According to Maria, who called me secretly from her cell phone during her lunch break, Jake's first executive decision was to fire 3 of our most experienced servers because he thought they were too old and slow. These were people who had been with us for years, who knew every regular customer's preferences and could handle a full dining room with grace and efficiency. His second decision was to change suppliers, because he believed I had been paying too much for ingredients. The relationships I had spent years cultivating with local farms and specialty distributors were severed with phone calls that Maria described as rude and dismissive. Giuseppe, our bread supplier, called me personally to express confusion about why Romano's had suddenly canceled their exclusive contract without explanation or courtesy. Jake's approach to the Pinnacle Hotel's contract was particularly painful to hear about. He scheduled a meeting with Rebecca Chen and the corporate events team, apparently believing that the deal was already secured and required nothing more than his signature on paperwork. Maria learned from Tony, who overheard Jake's phone conversations, that he had done no preparation, reviewed none of the detailed proposals I had submitted, and seemed genuinely surprised when the hotel executives asked specific questions about logistics, staffing, and quality control measures. The meeting, according to Rebecca Chen's assistant, who called me personally afterward, was a disaster from beginning to end. Jake arrived 15 minutes late, dressed casually in jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, explaining that he had been stuck in traffic without offering an apology. When Rebecca asked about the specialized equipment needed for large-scale catering events, Jake confidently assured her that kitchens were kitchens and Romano's could handle anything. His dismissive attitude toward health department requirements for large-scale food preparation showed dangerous ignorance about industry regulations. When the hotel's food service director asked about our HACCP certification and allergen protocols, Jake responded that Romano's had been serving food safely for 40 years without problems, missing the point that corporate catering required documentation and compliance standards that neighborhood restaurant service did not. The final blow came when Rebecca asked about the seasonal menu variations I had proposed, which incorporated hotel-specific preferences and dietary restrictions for their diverse clientele. Jake admitted he had not reviewed any of the previous proposals, but assured everyone that Romano's traditional Italian menu would satisfy any customer. The hotel executives exchanged glances that Rebecca later described to her assistant as professional embarrassment. Sarah tried to comfort me by pointing out that I had warned them this would happen, but hearing about Jake's failures felt like watching a car accident in slow motion. Every mistake he made reflected on the Romano's reputation I had spent a decade building. Every burned bridge with suppliers or partners was a relationship I had nurtured being destroyed by carelessness and arrogance. By the end of the first week, the consequences of Jake's mismanagement extended beyond the lost Pinnacle Hotel's contract. Maria reported that several regular customers had complained about changes in food quality and service. The Friday night crowd, which had become our most profitable evening, was noticeably smaller. 2 longtime servers had quit without giving notice, leaving the remaining staff scrambling to cover shifts and tables. Tony called me directly, breaking the informal rule that employees should not contact me while I was away. His voice was strained with frustration as he described Jake's interference in kitchen operations. Despite having no culinary training or experience in professional food service, Jake had started making suggestions about portion sizes, cooking methods, and presentation that contradicted everything we had developed over the years. The conversation that changed everything happened on Saturday evening, exactly 1 week after I had walked out. Maria called me from the restaurant's office, speaking in whispers because Jake was in the dining room. She had overheard a phone conversation between Jake and Rebecca Chen that revealed the full scope of the damage to our reputation. Not only had Pinnacle Hotels terminated their contract discussions with Romano's, but Rebecca had been so offended by Jake's unprofessional behavior and apparent incompetence that she had contacted other hotel chains in their network. She specifically warned them against considering Romano's for any catering services, describing the meeting as the worst vendor presentation she had experienced in 15 years of corporate event planning. The blacklisting extended beyond lost revenue to complete reputation destruction in the corporate catering market. Hotels talk to each other, especially about vendors who waste their time or fail to meet professional standards. Word was spreading through industry networks that Romano's was unreliable, unprepared, and unprofessional. Years of careful relationship building had been undone in a single meeting. Maria's voice broke as she told me that Jake had blamed the lost contract on my absence, claiming that I had sabotaged the deal somehow to make him look bad. He apparently believed that business relationships were automatic rather than earned, that handshake agreements and personal trust could be transferred like property deeds. The idea that Rebecca Chen and her team needed to feel confident in Romano's ability to deliver excellent service seemed to have never occurred to him. As I sat in Sarah's living room that Saturday night, staring at my phone after Maria's call ended, I felt a complex mix of emotions that surprised me. Anger and frustration were obvious, but underneath them was something that felt almost like relief. For 10 years, I had carried the weight of Romano's success on my shoulders, working endless hours and sacrificing personal relationships to build something lasting and meaningful. Now, watching that work being destroyed by someone who had contributed nothing to its creation, I realized that my value had never been more clear. Every disaster that Jake created proved what I already knew, but had never been forced to demonstrate. I was not replaceable. My skills, relationships, and dedication were not inherited rights that could be transferred to someone else simply because they shared my last name. The phone rang again as I was processing these thoughts. This time it was Frank, calling from the restaurant's landline. His voice was tight with worry as he asked if I had heard about the lost hotel contract. I could hear classical music playing in the background, the same Italian songs that had provided atmosphere during dinner service for as long as I could remember. I told him that I had heard, and that he should discuss any concerns with Jake, the CEO. Frank started to explain that mistakes had been made, that perhaps changes could be reconsidered, but I interrupted him gently. I said that I respected his decision to put Jake in charge, and that I respected Jake's authority to handle business matters as he saw fit. Then I hung up and turned off my phone. The quiet that followed was the first peace I had felt in a week. For the first time since leaving Romano's, I was not angry or hurt or afraid. I was free to make my own decisions about my future, and I had skills and experience that would be valued by people who understood their worth. The Pinnacle Hotel's contract was gone, but other opportunities existed for someone willing to start fresh and build something new. The second week brought news that confirmed my worst fears about the speed of Romano's decline. Sarah, who had taken to stopping by the restaurant during her evening walks to observe the changes, reported that the dining room was noticeably emptier during what should have been peak hours. The Thursday night crowd, which had always been our strong finish to the work week, consisted of fewer than half the usual number of tables. Food quality complaints started appearing on online review sites, written by longtime customers who expressed disappointment and confusion about changes in their favorite dishes. Mrs. Patterson, who had celebrated every family birthday at Romano's for 8 years, posted a review describing her disappointment with the different bread, altered sauce recipes, and inexperienced server who seemed unfamiliar with menu items and wine pairings. Jake's decision to change suppliers had disrupted the careful balance of flavors and presentations that defined Romano's character. The new bread lacked the texture and taste that Giuseppe's expertise provided. Vegetables from a large commercial distributor replaced the seasonal, locally grown produce that had made our specials fresh and distinctive. Even the olive oil, sourced from a different supplier to save money, changed the fundamental taste of dishes that customers had come to expect and love. Meanwhile, I began receiving phone calls from other restaurant owners who had heard about my availability. Word travels fast in the food service industry, especially when someone with a proven track record suddenly becomes available for new opportunities. James Morrison, who owned 3 successful bistros in the downtown area, invited me to lunch to discuss a consulting position that could lead to partnership in a new venture. During our meeting at Café Luna, a small French restaurant 2 miles from Romano's, James explained that his restaurant group was planning to expand into corporate catering and special event services. They had the financial resources and established customer base, but lacked someone with my specific experience in large-scale food preparation and client relationship management. The conversation was refreshing after years of being taken for granted at Romano's. Rebecca Chen called me personally on Tuesday afternoon, explaining that she had heard about my departure from Romano's through industry connections. She expressed genuine regret about the lost partnership and asked whether I might be interested in discussing catering opportunities with a new restaurant or independent catering company. The conversation lasted 45 minutes and ended with her invitation to submit a proposal for upcoming Pinnacle Hotels events if I established my own business. But Jake's mismanagement was creating problems that extended beyond lost contracts and disappointed customers. Maria called me Wednesday evening with news that made my stomach turn. Jake had fired her, accusing her of disloyalty for maintaining contact with me and questioning his decisions about menu changes. Maria had been my most trusted colleague for 7 years, someone who understood both the culinary standards and customer service philosophy that made Romano's successful. Her termination was particularly cruel because it came without warning or severance pay, violating both professional courtesy and legal requirements for employees who had worked more than 5 years for the same company. Jake apparently believed that his CEO title gave him unlimited authority to make personnel decisions without considering labor laws or common decency. Tony called me the next morning to report that he was considering quitting. The kitchen environment had become toxic, with Jake interfering in food preparation processes he did not understand and blaming staff for problems created by his poor decisions. 2 line cooks had already given notice, leaving the kitchen understaffed during the dinner rush and forcing Tony to work double shifts to maintain even basic service standards. The health department's surprise inspection on Friday was the inevitable result of Jake's ignorance about food safety regulations. According to Tony, who witnessed the entire process, inspectors found multiple violations that would have been easily avoided under my management. Temperature logs had not been maintained properly, storage protocols had been ignored, and cleaning schedules had been abandoned in favor of Jake's belief that the restaurant was already clean enough. The violations resulted in a formal warning and mandatory reinspection within 30 days, with the threat of closure if problems were not corrected. More damaging than the legal requirements was the public record of the inspection, which would be available to anyone researching Romano's reputation online. Corporate clients considering catering services would see health department violations as a red flag that eliminated Romano's from consideration entirely. Saturday evening brought the review that I had been dreading. Timothy Walsh, the food critic for our city's weekly newspaper, had been a supporter of Romano's for years, often mentioning us in articles about hidden gems and neighborhood favorites. His review of Jake's Romano's was devastating in its disappointed tone rather than angry criticism. Walsh wrote about returning to a restaurant he had recommended to friends and family, expecting the consistent quality and welcoming atmosphere that had made Romano's special, only to find inferior food, confused service, and an overall experience that felt like a pale imitation of what the restaurant had been. He specifically mentioned the different bread, altered sauce flavors, and inexperienced staff who seemed unfamiliar with menu items and unable to answer questions about ingredients or preparation methods. The review concluded with Walsh's suggestion that Romano's appeared to be going through a difficult transition period and that potential customers might want to wait before visiting until the restaurant resolved whatever internal problems were affecting food and service quality. For a neighborhood restaurant that depended on word-of-mouth recommendations and repeat customers, the review was a professional death sentence. Sarah found me crying in her kitchen on Sunday morning, not from sadness but from exhaustion and frustration. Watching the systematic destruction of everything I had built was emotionally draining in ways I had not anticipated. Each phone call, bringing news of another disaster, felt like watching someone methodically destroying a piece of art I had spent years creating. But underneath the pain was a growing anger that felt clean and focused. Jake had not just taken my position, he was destroying the legacy that belonged to our entire family, including employees who depended on Romano's for their livelihoods, and customers who had trusted us to provide consistent quality and service. His selfishness was hurting people who had done nothing wrong except work for and support a business they believed in. The phone call that changed everything came on Sunday evening. Sarah answered because I had started letting her screen calls from numbers I recognized. Frank's voice was tight with panic as he asked to speak with me about urgent business matters. When Sarah handed me the phone, I could hear classical music and voices in the background, suggesting that the restaurant was open and serving customers despite the growing problems. Frank's voice was strained as he explained that they were facing serious financial problems. Revenue had dropped 40% in 2 weeks, forcing him to consider emergency loans to cover payroll and rent. Several longtime customers had called to complain about service and food quality, with some explicitly stating that they would not return until improvements were made. I listened to his explanation without interrupting, feeling a complex mix of sympathy for his panic and satisfaction that the consequences of their decision were becoming undeniably clear. When he finished, I told him that these sounded like serious problems that required immediate attention from someone with authority to make changes. I suggested that he discuss his concerns with Jake, the CEO they had chosen to lead Romano's into the future. The silence that followed my response was filled with the weight of recognition. Frank understood that I was not going to rescue them from problems created by their own poor judgment. I was not going to sacrifice my dignity and self-respect to save them from the consequences of choosing tradition over competence and gender over proven ability. Before hanging up, Frank asked quietly whether there might be some way to fix the situation, some compromise that could bring me back without undermining Jake's position. I told him that they had made their choice very clear, and that I respected their decision too much to interfere with Jake's leadership. Then, I wished him good luck and ended the call. That night, I started seriously researching the process of opening my own restaurant. If Romano's was going to fail under Jake's management, I wanted to be ready with an alternative that could serve the community and employ the skilled people who were being driven away by his incompetence. The idea felt both terrifying and exhilarating, like stepping off a cliff and discovering I could fly. Monday morning marked the beginning of my transformation from displaced employee to entrepreneur. James Morrison called at 8 o'clock sharp to follow up on our previous conversation, explaining that his restaurant group was prepared to offer me a consulting contract that could evolve into partnership opportunities. The terms were generous. A base salary plus percentage of revenue from catering contracts I secured, along with equity participation if the new venture met performance targets. More importantly, James understood that my value lay not just in cooking skills, but in relationship management and operational expertise. He had researched the Pinnacle Hotel's situation and recognized that Jake's failure reflected incompetence rather than any flaw in the original partnership opportunity. His proposal included immediate outreach to corporate clients who might be interested in working with me under different circumstances. But as attractive as the Meridian Restaurant Group offer was, I found myself drawn to a more ambitious possibility. During a Wednesday afternoon coffee meeting with Sarah, I started articulating an idea that had been forming since the weekend. Opening my own restaurant that would honor my grandfather's legacy while showcasing the modern techniques and business practices that had made Romano's successful. Nana's Kitchen would be my tribute to the woman who had taught my grandfather to cook and the recipes that formed the foundation of Romano's identity. But unlike the restaurant my family was currently destroying, Nana's would be built on principles of respect for both tradition and innovation, combining time-tested flavors with contemporary presentation and professional management standards that could support both neighborhood dining and large-scale catering operations. The location I found was perfect in ways that felt almost too good to be true. A former bakery on Elm Street, just 6 blocks from Romano's, had been vacant for 8 months after the previous owner retired. The space included a commercial kitchen that met health department requirements for catering operations, a dining room that could accommodate 60 customers, and a small private dining area suitable for special events and business meetings. More importantly, the location was in a neighborhood that was experiencing renewal without gentrification, attracting young families and professionals who appreciated quality food and personal service. Market research suggested that the area could support another restaurant, especially one that offered both casual dining and corporate catering services that were currently unavailable in the immediate vicinity. Financing came together more quickly than I had expected. My personal savings from 10 years of modest salary and careful budgeting provided enough for the initial deposit and equipment purchases. A small business loan from the bank where Romanos had maintained accounts for decades was approved based on my track record and detailed business plan. The loan officer, who had watched me handle Romano's finances for years, expressed confidence in my ability to make the new venture successful. But the most satisfying aspect of planning Nana's Kitchen was reconnecting with the network of suppliers and partners I had cultivated during my years at Romano's. Giuseppe agreed enthusiastically to provide bread exclusively for the new restaurant, expressing relief that he would be working with someone who understood and valued his craftsmanship. Maria Gonzalez offered to expand her herb and vegetable production to meet the needs of both the restaurant and catering operations. Within 2 weeks, I had secured agreements with every supplier that Jake had alienated, plus several new partners who had heard about my plans through industry connections. The advantage of building these relationships over many years was that they were based on mutual respect and understanding rather than simple transactions. People wanted to work with me because they trusted my judgment and professionalism. Tony called me on Thursday evening to ask whether I might have a position for an experienced sous chef who was looking for new opportunities. His voice was careful and professional, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. Working for Jake had become unbearable, with daily interference in kitchen operations and blame for problems that were not his fault. When I offered him the head chef position at Nana's Kitchen, he accepted immediately and gave notice at Romano's the next morning. The departure of Tony, who had been the backbone of Romano's kitchen operations for 7 years, sent shockwaves through the remaining staff. 3 line cooks gave notice within 2 days, followed by the pastry chef and 2 servers who had hoped to weather the transition, but recognized that the situation was not improving. Maria, who had been fired by Jake but maintained contact with former colleagues, reported that the restaurant was now severely understaffed and struggling to maintain even basic service during dinner hours. Word of my new restaurant spread through the food service community faster than I had anticipated. Rebecca Chen called personally to express excitement about the possibility of working together again, explaining that Pinnacle Hotels had been disappointed to lose the Romano's partnership and would be very interested in discussing catering contracts with Nana's Kitchen once operations began. 3 other hotel chains contacted me directly after hearing about the new venture through industry networks. The reputation I had built over 10 years of reliable, professional service was transferable and valuable in ways that Jake had apparently never understood. Business relationships in the hospitality industry are based on trust and proven performance, qualities that cannot be inherited or assumed. The design phase of Nana's Kitchen allowed me to address every operational challenge I had encountered at Romano's. The kitchen layout prioritized efficiency and safety for both regular service and large-scale catering preparation. The dining room combined intimate seating for couples, with larger tables suitable for family gatherings and business meals. Every detail reflected lessons learned from years of experience and mistakes I was determined not to repeat. But the most meaningful aspect of planning the new restaurant was the opportunity to create an employment environment that reflected my values about respect, professional development, and shared success. Staff positions would include benefits, packages, opportunities for advancement, and profit-sharing arrangements that gave everyone a stake in the restaurant's success. The contrast with Jake's authoritarian approach to management could not have been more stark. Carol made an unexpected visit to the Nana's Kitchen location on a rainy Thursday afternoon in November. I was meeting with contractors about kitchen equipment installation when she appeared at the front door, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. Her gray hair was styled differently, and she wore a simple black coat that emphasized the worry lines around her eyes. She asked if we could talk privately, and I led her to what would become the private dining area, where folding chairs and contractor tools created a makeshift meeting space. For several minutes, she simply looked around the empty room, taking in the exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and large windows that would provide natural light during breakfast and lunch service. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. She said that she and Frank had made a terrible mistake, that they had let old-fashioned ideas about family and tradition cloud their judgment about what was best for the business and the people who depended on it. She admitted that watching Romano's deteriorate under Jake's management was breaking her heart, but that their pride had prevented them from acknowledging the problem or asking for help. The conversation lasted an hour, during which Carol shared details about the restaurant's declining condition that were even worse than I had heard through former employees. Jake had stopped coming in regularly, leaving the remaining skeleton crew to handle service without adequate leadership or support. Several pieces of essential kitchen equipment had broken down, and repairs were being delayed because of cash flow problems. Most painfully, Carol revealed that several longtime customers had contacted her personally to express concern about the changes at Romano's and to ask whether the family was experiencing problems. These were people who had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and graduation dinners at the restaurant for decades, who considered Romano's part of their family's history. Their disappointment and confusion were harder for Carol to bear than financial losses or bad reviews. As our conversation ended, Carol asked whether there might be some way to resolve the situation, some compromise that could bring the family back together and save the restaurant that my grandfather had built. I told her gently that reconciliation would require acknowledgement of mistakes and willingness to make fundamental changes, qualities that Jake had not demonstrated in his brief time as CEO. I also explained that I was committed to Nana's Kitchen and excited about the opportunity to build something new that honored our family's culinary traditions while meeting modern professional standards. The new restaurant would offer employment opportunities for displaced Romano's staff and catering services for clients who valued quality and reliability. Carol hugged me before leaving, the first physical contact between us since the day I had walked out of Romano's. She whispered that she was proud of what I was accomplishing and sorry that family loyalty had made them forget the difference between loving someone and enabling their poor decisions. That evening, I received a call that transformed my understanding of Jake's motivations and the true scope of his betrayal. Rebecca Chen had been contacted by a commercial real estate agent who was promoting the availability of Romano's property for potential development. According to the agent, the current owner was interested in selling quickly for conversion to retail space, possibly a shopping center or chain restaurant location. The revelation that Jake was secretly planning to sell the restaurant property explained his indifference to operational problems and customer relationships. He had never intended to run Romano's successfully. His goal was to gain control of the business long enough to force a sale that would generate immediate cash at the expense of our family's legacy and the livelihoods of everyone who depended on the restaurant. The betrayal was more calculated and malicious than I had realized. Jake had not simply failed through incompetence. He had deliberately sabotaged relationships and operations to justify a sale decision that my parents would never have agreed to if they had understood his true intentions. His CEO position was a tool for destruction rather than leadership, a way to eliminate obstacles to personal profit without regard for consequences. Sitting in Sarah's living room that night, reviewing business plans for Nana's Kitchen and processing the full scope of Jake's deception, I felt something shift inside me. Anger and hurt were replaced by a cold determination to succeed that was stronger than any emotion I had experienced. Jake could destroy Romano's if he chose, but he could not destroy my skills, relationships, or commitment to excellence. Nana's Kitchen would be more than a new restaurant. It would be proof that integrity and competence ultimately triumph over manipulation and selfishness. Every successful catering contract, every satisfied customer, and every loyal employee would demonstrate the difference between earning respect and demanding it, between building something lasting and grabbing something temporary. The fight was no longer about saving Romano's or gaining recognition from my family. It was about protecting the values and standards that my grandfather had represented and ensuring that his legacy lived on through work that honored his memory properly. Jake could have the family name, but I would carry forward the family spirit. Frank appeared at Nana's Kitchen on a cold Tuesday morning in December, wearing the same brown wool coat he had worn to church every Sunday for as long as I could remember. I was reviewing final preparations for our soft opening with Tony and two new line cooks when I saw him standing at the front door, shifting his weight from foot to foot in the way he did when he was nervous or uncertain. He looked older than his 67 years, with gray stubble on his usually clean-shaven face and deep circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. When I opened the door, he removed his hat and asked quietly if he could speak with me about urgent family business. The formality in his tone was heartbreaking, as if we were strangers conducting a difficult negotiation rather than father and daughter. I led him to a corner table in the main dining room, where morning sunlight through the large windows created a warm atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the tension between us. Tony and the kitchen staff continued their prep work, giving us privacy while remaining within earshot. Frank sat across from me, turning his hat in his hands, struggling to find words for what he needed to say. For 10 minutes, he talked around the subject, mentioning the weather, asking about my health, and commenting on the beautiful renovation of the old bakery space. I waited patiently, recognizing his need to approach difficult topics indirectly, remembering how many family conversations had begun with small talk before addressing serious matters. Finally, his voice breaking slightly, Frank admitted that they had made a catastrophic mistake in choosing Jake over me. Romano's was failing completely, with revenue down 70% from the previous year and debt accumulating faster than they could handle. The health department had issued a second violation notice, threatening closure if immediate improvements were not made. Several longtime employees had quit without notice, leaving them unable to staff the kitchen properly during peak hours. More devastating than financial problems was the community's loss of faith in Romano's reputation and reliability. Frank described the shame of encountering customers at the grocery store or church who politely asked about the restaurant, but clearly had no intention of returning. Mrs. Patterson, whose family had celebrated every major milestone at Romano's for 8 years, had quietly mentioned that they were planning their daughter's graduation dinner at another restaurant because they could no longer depend on consistent quality. The conversation became more painful as Frank revealed the full extent of Jake's deception and abandonment. Not only had he been secretly negotiating with real estate developers about selling the property, but he had also withdrawn $50,000 from the restaurant's business account without authorization or explanation. When Frank confronted him about the missing money, Jake claimed it was compensation for his CEO role and management expertise. 2 weeks ago, Jake had simply disappeared, leaving a note saying that he was returning to Los Angeles to pursue film opportunities and that Frank and Carol should handle the restaurant's problems themselves. His phone number had been disconnected, and attempts to reach him through mutual friends had been unsuccessful. The man they had trusted with their family legacy had abandoned them to face consequences he had created. Frank's voice was barely above a whisper as he explained their current situation. The restaurant owed $90,000 in back rent, $60,000 in unpaid supplier bills, and $40,000 in employee wages and taxes. The building's owner had issued a 30-day eviction notice, and 2 suppliers had threatened legal action for non-payment. Without immediate intervention, Romano's would close permanently within a month. The desperation in his request for help was heartbreaking to witness. This proud man who had built a successful business from nothing, who had provided for his family and employed dozens of people over 4 decades, was begging his daughter to save him from catastrophic failure caused by his own poor judgment. He offered me complete ownership of Romano's, including the recipes, customer lists, and any remaining value in the business name. But as Frank spoke, I realized that the situation was even more complex than family betrayal and business failure. Carol made a separate visit that afternoon, bringing a photo album filled with pictures from my childhood and early years working at the restaurant. Her approach was emotional rather than business-focused, appealing to memories and family bonds rather than financial arrangements. She showed me photos of my first day helping in the kitchen at age 12, carefully stirring sauce under my grandfather's supervision. Pictures of high school graduation dinner where the entire staff had gathered to celebrate and present me with a gift certificate for culinary school. Images from Romano's 20th anniversary party, where I stood between my parents looking proud and hopeful about the future we were building together. Carol's tears were genuine as she talked about the guilt that kept her awake at night, knowing that they had betrayed someone who had sacrificed everything for the family business. She admitted that old-fashioned beliefs about gender roles had influenced their decision, but insisted that they had never intended to hurt me or destroy what we had built together. The photo album was her way of asking forgiveness and appealing to shared history that transcended current conflicts. Both conversations forced me to confront emotions I had been trying to avoid since walking out of Romano's 3 months earlier. Underneath anger and disappointment was genuine love for people who had raised me, supported my dreams, and worked alongside me for 10 years to build something meaningful. Their mistake was serious and hurtful, but it stemmed from cultural conditioning rather than malicious intent. Maria and Tony organized their own intervention, visiting me at Nana's kitchen on Saturday evening after service at their current jobs. Both had found employment at other restaurants, but they missed the camaraderie and shared purpose that had made Romano's special during its successful years. They understood the family dynamics involved, but also recognized that dozens of former employees and hundreds of regular customers were affected by the restaurant's failure. Their argument was practical rather than emotional. Romano's had a customer base and reputation that could be restored with proper management. The location was established and familiar to neighborhood residents who wanted to support local businesses. Closing permanently would waste resources and opportunities that could benefit everyone involved, including suppliers and employees who had invested years in building relationships and developing skills. More importantly, Maria pointed out that saving Romano's would allow me to demonstrate forgiveness and family unity while maintaining my independence and authority. I could own and operate 2 restaurants, serving different markets, and offering more opportunities for employee advancement and customer choice. The arrangement would prove that competence and character ultimately triumph over prejudice and poor judgment. The conversation that changed my perspective came during a meeting with Rebecca Chen about Pinnacle Hotel's catering needs for the upcoming conference season. She mentioned that her corporate events team was impressed by my plans for Nana's Kitchen, but also disappointed that Romano's had become unavailable as an option for their diverse catering requirements. Rebecca explained that large hotel chains prefer working with multiple vendors to ensure backup options and accommodate different event styles and budgets. Nana's Kitchen would excel at upscale events requiring sophisticated cuisine and presentation, while a restored Romano's could handle larger, family-style gatherings that emphasized comfort and tradition. Having both restaurants available would make me a more valuable partner and increase contract opportunities significantly. The business logic was compelling, but the personal decision remained difficult. Saving Romano's would require significant financial investment, probably more than $200,000 to cover debts and necessary improvements. It would also mean working with Frank and Carol again, rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries that respected my authority while acknowledging family relationships. James Morrison from Meridian Restaurant Group offered a solution that addressed both business and personal concerns. His company was willing to partner with me in purchasing Romano's assets and managing the restoration process. They would provide financing and operational support while I maintained control over menu development, staff hiring, and daily operations. The arrangement would protect me from personal financial risk, while ensuring that Romano's could reopen successfully. Sunday evening brought the phone call that made my decision inevitable. Frank's voice was strained with panic as he described a visit from commercial real estate developers who had presented purchase offers for the Romano's property. The amounts were substantial enough to pay most of the outstanding debts, but accepting would mean permanent closure and conversion to retail space that would eliminate the restaurant forever. As Frank spoke about the pressure to accept these offers and his uncertainty about other options, I heard something in his voice that I had never heard before: complete helplessness. This strong man who had provided guidance and stability throughout my childhood was lost and afraid, facing consequences he did not understand and problems he could not solve alone. The realization that hit me was not about business or money or even family loyalty. It was about responsibility to something larger than personal grievances and individual success. Romano's represented my grandfather's dreams, my parents' lifetime of work, and the livelihood of dozens of people who depended on its success. Allowing it to fail completely would be a waste of something valuable and irreplaceable. More importantly, I recognized that I had the power to save everything that mattered while proving my point about competence and leadership. Rescuing Romano's under terms that acknowledged my authority and protected my interests would demonstrate strength rather than weakness, wisdom rather than stubbornness. That night, I called James Morrison to accept his partnership offer and begin negotiations for acquiring Romano's. The decision felt both terrifying and inevitable, like accepting a challenge that would define my character and professional legacy. I was not just saving a failing restaurant. I was proving that family love could coexist with business principles and that forgiveness could be powerful rather than passive. Monday morning began with a phone call to Marcus Sullivan, the attorney who had handled Romano's legal affairs for 15 years. I explained the situation carefully, emphasizing Jake's unauthorized withdrawals, forged documents, and secret negotiations with real estate developers. Marcus confirmed that Jake's actions constituted multiple felonies, including embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft, but warned that pursuing criminal charges would be emotionally difficult and legally complex. However, he also explained that documenting these crimes was essential for protecting Frank and Carol from potential liability. If prosecutors decided to investigate the restaurant's financial problems, having evidence of Jake's unauthorized actions would establish that my parents were victims rather than accomplices. The distinction could mean the difference between civil liability and criminal charges for elderly people who had already suffered enough. James Morrison arrived at Nana's Kitchen that afternoon with a team of accountants and lawyers who began the complex process of structuring our partnership and acquisition offer. The deal they proposed was more generous than I had expected. Meridian Restaurant Group would provide $250,000 in immediate financing to cover Romano's debts and renovation costs, while I would maintain 51% ownership and complete operational control of both restaurants. The partnership offered advantages beyond financial support. Meridian's purchasing power would reduce food costs and equipment expenses, while their marketing team could promote both Romano's and Nana's Kitchen to corporate clients throughout the region. Most importantly, their legal and administrative staff would handle regulatory compliance and financial management, allowing me to focus on the culinary and customer service aspects that were my strengths. By Wednesday, we had submitted a formal offer to purchase Romano's assets and assume its debts, contingent on Frank and Carol's agreement to work as employees under my management. The terms were firm but fair. They would retain jobs and modest salaries while transferring complete business ownership to someone qualified to restore the restaurant's reputation and profitability. The 2-week restoration period was intensive and exhausting, but also deeply satisfying in ways I had not anticipated. Returning to Romano's Kitchen felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. The familiar layout and equipment brought back memories of early mornings preparing for busy nights, late evenings cleaning and planning for the next day, and countless small moments of satisfaction when everything worked perfectly. Rehiring loyal staff was one of the most rewarding aspects of the restoration process. Tony's return as head chef brought stability and expertise that had been missing during Jake's chaotic management. Maria's promotion to assistant manager recognized her years of dedication and gave her authority to implement customer service standards that reflected Romano's traditional values. 3 former line cooks accepted offers to return, along with 2 servers who had quit rather than work under Jake's unprofessional management. New hires were chosen carefully based on experience, attitude, and commitment to teamwork rather than simply filling positions quickly. Every employee understood that they were participating in something special, the resurrection of a beloved restaurant that had lost its way. Rebuilding supplier relationships required personal visits and honest conversations about what had gone wrong and how we intended to prevent future problems. Giuseppe welcomed us back enthusiastically. explaining that Jake's rudeness and unreliability had cost him several other potential clients who questioned his judgment in business partnerships. Maria Gonzalez expanded her production capacity specifically to meet our needs, grateful for the stable income that a successful restaurant partnership would provide. The renovation itself focused on deep cleaning, equipment repairs, and small improvements that enhanced efficiency without changing Romano's essential character. New paint, refinished floors, and updated lighting created a fresher atmosphere while preserving the warmth and intimacy that had made the restaurant special. Every detail reflected respect for the past and confidence in the future. Rebecca Chen scheduled a personal visit to assess Romano's readiness for renewed partnership discussions. Her tour of the renovated restaurant was thorough and professional, examining kitchen facilities, reviewing menu options, and discussing logistics for large-scale catering events. The conversation was encouraging, with Rebecca expressing genuine excitement about working together again and confidence that Romano's could meet Pinnacle Hotel's standards for quality and reliability. The test came during our soft reopening weekend, when we invited former customers, suppliers, and community leaders to experience the restored Romano's without charge. The response exceeded our most optimistic expectations, with every table filled and a waiting list of people eager to see whether their neighborhood restaurant had truly returned to form. Mrs. Patterson and her family were among the first arrivals, having made reservations the moment they heard about Romano's reopening. Her husband's face lit up when Tony personally brought their favorite appetizer to the table, prepared exactly as they remembered from years of family celebrations. Their teenage daughter, who had grown up eating at Romano's, said the food tasted like childhood memories come back to life. The evening was not just about food and service, but about rebuilding trust and demonstrating that change could be positive rather than destructive. Customers who had been disappointed by Jake's management were cautiously optimistic about giving Romano's another chance. Their willingness to return despite past bad experiences was a gift that required careful protection and grateful acknowledgement. Thursday brought the phone call that I had been simultaneously expecting and dreading. Frank's voice was tight with excitement as he reported that Jake had returned unexpectedly, accompanied by an attorney and demanding access to restaurant facilities and financial records. According to Frank, Jake claimed that his CEO appointment was legally binding and that any changes to business ownership required his approval as the designated successor. The confrontation I had been preparing for was finally happening, but under circumstances that favored us completely. Marcus Sullivan had spent 2 weeks documenting Jake's crimes, gathering witness statements from employees and suppliers, and coordinating with law enforcement officials who were ready to act when the opportunity arose. Detective Richardson from the Financial Crimes Unit had reviewed our evidence and confirmed that Jake's actions warranted serious criminal charges. When Jake arrived at Romano's that Thursday evening, he was clearly expecting to intimidate his way back into control. He wore an expensive suit and carried a briefcase, projecting confidence and authority that he believed would overwhelm any resistance. His attorney, a young man who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, carried documents that supposedly proved Jake's legal right to control the restaurant. The scene that unfolded was everything I had hoped for, and more. Jake's shock at seeing the restored dining room, professional staff, and busy kitchen was immediately replaced by anger when he realized that his absence had not created the crisis he had expected. His demands for explanations became increasingly agitated as Frank and Carol explained that the restaurant was now under new management. But the moment that made everything worthwhile came when Jake noticed me standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing chef's whites and clearly in charge of operations. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, anger, and finally, fear, as he understood that his plans had not just failed, but backfired completely. Jake's attempt to assert authority was pathetic and desperate, involving shouted demands that everyone acknowledge his CEO title and threats to have me arrested for trespassing. His attorney tried to calm him down, apparently recognizing that the situation was not what had been described to him. Other customers in the dining room stopped eating to watch the disruption, their faces showing embarrassment for Jake rather than support for his claims. Detective Richardson's timing was perfect. He entered the restaurant just as Jake's shouting reached its peak, accompanied by two uniformed officers who had been waiting outside. The sight of law enforcement immediately changed the atmosphere from confrontational to official, with Jake's bluster evaporating into confusion and growing panic. The arrest was conducted professionally and quietly, with Detective Richardson explaining the charges while placing handcuffs on Jake's wrists. Embezzlement, fraud, and identity theft were serious felonies that could result in years of prison time, especially given the amount of money involved and the deliberate nature of the crimes. Jake's expensive suit and confident demeanor became symbols of arrogance rather than authority as he was led toward a police car. The moment I had waited for came as Jake passed my position near the kitchen door. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief, unable to understand how his guaranteed success had become complete failure. I told him calmly that any questions about restaurant operations should be directed to the current owner and CEO, which was me. The recognition in his eyes was worth all the pain and uncertainty of the previous 4 months. As the police car pulled away, the restaurant fell silent, except for the quiet conversations of customers who had witnessed something extraordinary. Frank and Carol stood together near the hostess station, looking older and frailer than I remembered, but also relieved in a way that suggested enormous weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The applause started slowly, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband clapping softly, then spread through the dining room as other customers joined in. It was not celebration of Jake's arrest, but recognition of justice served and a beloved restaurant saved from destruction. The sound was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Validation that community support and professional competence had triumphed over manipulation and selfishness. That night, after the last customer had left and the staff had finished cleaning, I stood alone in Romano's kitchen, surrounded by the tools and memories of 10 years spent building something meaningful. The familiar weight of responsibility felt good on my shoulders, no longer a burden but a privilege earned through persistence, skill, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The fight was over, and we had won completely. Jake would face legal consequences for his crimes while I controlled both Romano's and Nana's kitchen, employing dozens of people and serving hundreds of customers who valued quality and integrity. The victory was not just personal but professional, proving that excellence ultimately defeats mediocrity and that respect must be earned rather than inherited. 6 months later, Romano's was thriving beyond anything we had achieved during the previous decade. The partnership with Meridian Restaurant Group had provided resources and expertise that transformed both restaurants into regional destinations rather than simply neighborhood establishments. Our weekend reservations were booked 3 weeks in advance, and the catering division was handling events for clients throughout the tri-state area. The Pinnacle Hotel's contract had been renewed and expanded to include their properties in 2 neighboring cities, representing $1.2 million in guaranteed revenue over 3 years. Rebecca Chen had become not just a business partner, but a personal friend, someone who understood the value of reliability and professionalism in an industry where both qualities were often rare. More importantly, Romano's had regained its position as a gathering place for the community, where families celebrated milestones and friends, shared ordinary evenings made special by excellent food and genuine hospitality. The dining room buzzed with conversation and laughter, creating the warm atmosphere that had always been our greatest asset. Nana's Kitchen had opened to universal acclaim from food critics and immediate acceptance from customers who appreciated its combination of traditional flavors and contemporary presentation. The restaurant served a different market than Romano's, attracting younger professionals and couples who wanted sophisticated dining experiences without pretentious attitudes or excessive prices. Operating 2 restaurants simultaneously was challenging, but enormously rewarding. Each location had its own character and clientele, but both reflected the same commitment to quality ingredients, careful preparation, and respectful service that had guided my work from the beginning. The diversity of opportunities kept the work interesting and provided advancement paths for employees who wanted to develop new skills. Frank and Carol had adapted to their new roles with grace and evident relief. Working as employees rather than owners had removed financial pressure and operational responsibility while allowing them to remain connected to the business they had spent 40 years building. Frank had become our unofficial ambassador to longtime customers, sharing stories and maintaining relationships that bridged past and present. Carol's transformation was particularly remarkable. Freed from the stress of business management, she had returned to cooking with the enthusiasm she had shown during Romano's early years. Her expertise in traditional recipes and classical techniques complemented my contemporary training, creating menu items that satisfied both nostalgic customers and adventurous diners. The legal resolution of Jake's crimes had provided closure and deterred similar problems in the future. He had been sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution from the sale of assets he had acquired with stolen money. The conviction also cleared Frank and Carol of any potential liability, confirming that they were victims of deception rather than accomplices in fraud. More satisfying than legal punishment was the knowledge that Jake's betrayal had ultimately strengthened our family and business rather than destroying them. His selfish actions had forced difficult conversations about respect, competence, and fairness that might never have happened otherwise. The crisis had revealed both character flaws and hidden strengths that shaped better relationships going forward. Maria had been promoted to general manager for both restaurants, with salary and profit-sharing arrangements that recognized her years of loyalty and growing expertise. Her success was particularly meaningful because it demonstrated that hard work and dedication were valued and rewarded in our organization. Several other longtime employees had received similar promotions and increased responsibilities as both restaurants expanded. Tony's position as executive chef gave him authority and creative freedom that had been impossible during Jake's chaotic management. His menu innovations had attracted attention from regional food magazines, and he was developing a cookbook that would feature Romano's family recipes alongside his own contemporary creations. The project represented exactly the kind of recognition and professional growth that made our work meaningful beyond simple financial success. The community response to Romano's resurrection had been overwhelmingly positive, with local business leaders, civic organizations, and neighborhood residents expressing gratitude that a beloved institution had been preserved and improved. The restaurant had become a symbol of how family conflicts could be resolved constructively, and how traditional values could coexist with progressive business practices. My personal life had also flourished during the period of professional success. David Rodriguez, who had supported me through the difficult months of family conflict and business transition, had proposed marriage during a quiet dinner at Nana's kitchen. He was a high school teacher who understood the demands of meaningful work and shared my commitment to community service and family responsibility. Our wedding, held in Romano's private dining room with both families and restaurant staff in attendance, had been a celebration of new beginnings built on strong foundations. Frank walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, grateful for the opportunity to participate in a joyful occasion after months of worry and regret. Carol's happiness was evident as she welcomed David into a family that had learned valuable lessons about love, respect, and forgiveness. The industry recognition that followed was gratifying but secondary to the satisfaction of daily success. The State Restaurant Association named me Young Entrepreneur of the Year, citing the restoration of Romano's and the launch of Nona's Kitchen as examples of innovative leadership and community commitment. The award ceremony gave me an opportunity to speak about the importance of treating employees as partners and customers as extended family. Regional food magazines featured articles about our restaurants that emphasized the combination of traditional recipes with modern management techniques. The coverage attracted customers from neighboring cities and established our reputation beyond the immediate community, creating opportunities for expansion that were both exciting and carefully managed to maintain quality standards. The most meaningful recognition came from former employees who had found better opportunities because of skills and experience gained at Romano's. 3 servers had used their hospitality training to advance to management positions at other restaurants. 2 line cooks had enrolled in culinary school with recommendation letters that helped them secure scholarships. Maria was considering offers from restaurant groups that wanted her to develop training programs based on our customer service philosophy. Looking back on the experience, I realized that Jake's betrayal had been a gift disguised as a catastrophe. His actions had forced me to discover strengths and capabilities that might have remained dormant if circumstances had not demanded their development. The crisis had revealed that my value extended far beyond family connections or inherited opportunities, that respect and authority could be earned through competence and character. The lesson that emerged from months of conflict and eventual triumph was profound and personally transformative. Sometimes the people who love us can hurt us the most, not out of malice, but out of unconscious bias and outdated beliefs about roles and capabilities. True family strength comes not from blind loyalty or traditional hierarchy, but from recognizing and rewarding genuine contribution and moral character. When you know your worth and stand firm in your values, even the most painful betrayals can become foundations for greater success and more authentic relationships. The courage to walk away from unfair treatment creates opportunities to build something better, while the wisdom to forgive without forgetting allows healing that strengthens rather than weakens family bonds. Success achieved through integrity and hard work feels different from advantages gained through favoritism or manipulation. Every satisfied customer, every loyal employee, and every profitable month represented validation that could not be taken away by changing circumstances or other people's opinions. The restaurants belonged to me not because of family connections, but because I had earned them through competence, dedication, and the courage to demand fair treatment. The future held possibilities that extended far beyond the immediate success of 2 restaurants. Franchising opportunities, cookbook publishing, and consulting services for other family businesses were all potential avenues for growth that honored the past while embracing innovation. Whatever direction our expansion took, it would be guided by principles learned through difficult experience about the difference between authentic leadership and inherited authority. Most importantly, the experience had taught me that standing up for yourself is not selfish when it protects valuable principles and serves the greater good. By refusing to accept unfair treatment and proving my worth through actions rather than words, I had saved not just my own career, but the livelihoods of dozens of employees and the gathering place that meant so much to our community. The story of Romano's resurrection would be told for years as an example of how family conflicts can be resolved constructively when everyone involved is willing to prioritize truth over tradition and competence over convenience. The lesson was applicable far beyond restaurant management, relevant to any situation where fairness and respect must be defended against prejudice and poor judgment. As I stood in Nana's kitchen on our first anniversary, watching families enjoy meals prepared with care and served with genuine hospitality, I felt grateful for every difficult moment that had led to this success. The pain of betrayal had been real and lasting, but it had also been transformative, revealing strengths and possibilities that peaceful circumstances might never have demanded. What challenges in your own family or workplace have forced you to discover hidden strengths and stand up for your values? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and fairness, or between tradition and progress? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've navigated difficult relationships and found your own path to success. Thank you for joining me on this journey of pain, growth, and eventual triumph. Your support and engagement mean everything to creators who share personal stories in hopes of connecting with others who have faced similar challenges. Please like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming obstacles and building meaningful success. And share this with anyone who might benefit from knowing that setbacks can become comebacks when we have the courage to fight for what we deserve. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's recognition or approval, but by your own commitment to excellence and integrity. Keep cooking, keep creating, and keep believing that good things happen to people who refuse to settle for less than they deserve.